And thank you everyone who's tuning in right now. Welcome to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. Manny's is a physical space. It's a civic gathering space on the corner of 16th and Valencia. Unfortunately, we had to shut down for the shelter-in-place order, which hopefully gets lifted sooner rather than later. It's still kind of unclear, although apparently we're through May. Who knows? Um, we do live programming, and we've moved our programming onto the internet through these civic cyber conversations. This is our 104th civic cyber conversation since we started at the beginning of Shelter in Place, and we're really, really honored today to have Terry Beswick, who is a friend of mine, who is an organizer in the Castro, is the executive director of the LGBT History Museum, the GLBT History Museum, excuse me, and the GLBT Historical Society, and is really, really goes deep on LGBT history and placemaking. And today we're going to talk about why we needed a LGBT History Museum, however you want to call it, and also the work that Terry has done and is doing. So welcome everyone. If you have a question for Terry, you can type it in at any time in the Q&A box. This program is going to be short, 25 to 30 minutes. So sit tight, ask your questions. All right, first, Terry, what is going on with the museum right now, the space? Obviously, you're shut down. How is it for you all? How is it going? How are you handling shelter in place?
Oh my God, that is such a big question. But you know what? We're a small business, just like Manny's is really. I mean, we're a nonprofit. Hopefully, Manny's is profitable. We are a nonprofit, though, an organization founded in 1985 to collect and share, preserve our queer history. And so we have a museum across the street from my place over here. It's a storefront museum. We've had it for several years, and yeah, we just boarded it up this week, and it was really sad to see it boarded up, of course. Normally we get about 24,000 visitors a year. And so that's a lot of people coming to San Francisco that are not able to go and just kind of get a view of, our 100, 150 years of history in San Francisco. We also have archives downtown, and the archives is one of the largest collections of queer historical materials in the world. So what we're doing is we're going online. Just like you and a lot of other cultural organizations, we've really taken the digital assets that we already had, and started to corral those and curate those onto our website. And we're just at this point doing the low-hanging fruit, taking the exhibits that we have, putting them online, the archival research resources that we have, putting those online. But we're really going to move towards establishing something much more branded and much fuller in terms of its content in the next several months.
Awesome. So what's the difference between GLBT or LGBT? Why is it GLBT? I have to ask. Everything else is LGBT. Y'all are GLBT. What's going on there?
I'm so glad that you asked, because that seems to be like a real hang up for a lot of people. That sort of they get this look, and I just know they're thinking about it.
It was just hard for me to say because I'm so used to saying LGBT, so I have to remember that it's GLBT for y'all. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it used to be gay, and then it was gay and lesbian, then it was gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and an acronym was formed, and both GLBT and LGBT were kind of kicking around at about the same time that our organization was founded. And so, we're a historical society, and frankly, the founders of our organization are academics, historians, and so they kind of don't easily change. And so so we're kind of stuck with that. We're actually thinking about rebranding it along with the establishment of a new museum, however, and kind of moving past it. But the other point about that, Manny, is that you can change it to LGBT, and then it becomes something else. You can change it to LGBTQ, and then how long is that going to last? And so part of it is just sort of waiting to see, what is it that we call ourselves, and what identities are included within which term. And so, so those kinds of arguments and discussions have happened for years, and we end up just sort of doing nothing.
Yeah, I thank you for explaining that, because I did always wonder. I have this, it just seems to me in my short experience as an openly gay male, that even just I'm 30, I came out when I was 18, and the nomenclature has changed a lot even in my adulthood. Now it feels like just coming out as gay is kind of, people, obviously people are coming out as gay, but there's so many more, it's so much more complex. And
Yeah.
people are starting, at least in our San Francisco bubble, to appreciate that complexity. And it feels like the nomenclature is changing constantly. And actually, the sexuality binary is being questioned a lot. There are a lot of people who identify as heteroflexible or homoflexible, all different sorts of gender queerness. And so I'm wondering how you think that affects the idea of identity when people are calling into question just the binary nature of sexuality and sexual orientation in general.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sexuality and gender are so complex, and there's really a spectrum. Scientists and sociologists have known that for a long time. And the question becomes, how do people identify and within those spectrums? And the amazing thing to me about the LGBTQ community, or the queer community, as I sometimes just call it, the queer community,
Yeah.
is how we come from every other sector of society as well, racially, uh, demographically, uh, class differences, geographic differences. So we really come from everywhere, and so we're one of the most intersectional populations that you can find anywhere in the world. And so I think there's a real power in that. And the real challenge is, like, as soon as we put a label on something, we sort of restrict it and define it in just being a thing
Yeah.
that has a lot of implicit biases around it, and separations from other people. And so it's, I sort of see the whole LGBTQ identity movement, or however you want to describe that, as being kind of propelling that consciousness forward,
Yeah.
for all of us. How we're, we come from different families,
Yeah.
and we bring our stories from our families to our queer community, and then we take our queer stories hopefully back to our families and the cultures that we come from. And I know that you see that in your own life. I remember when we met, it must have been like 4 years ago,
Where did
and
we?
we met at a cafe. I think Cleve Jones hooked us up, and
Oh
we
yeah.
met at a cafe downtown. And
Yes.
and I thought, you were super young and cute, and I think you were just coming off the Hillary Clinton campaign or something, and just
Yeah.
looking for something to do. And Cleve thought this museum thing would be a cool thing to do. So I still want to get you involved
Right.
in, like, launching this thing.
Well, I remember when you told me about it, when Cleve told me about it, and I think it's amazing, and I'm so
You're
excited.
busy now. No, you're busy. You're taken. I know, but
Oh,
we'll
no, no,
get you
no.
back.
That's not what I'm saying. I want to be involved. I want to help. But let's tell, for the folks who are tuning in, what is help what? What exactly is this plan that you have? And what are you trying to do, Terry?
Yeah, so we've been working on this for several years, and we actually just completed a set of feasibility studies to establish a new museum. Sorry about my dog. Um, and the the idea is, we have a rich and diverse history in San Francisco and really throughout the world, and there is no full-scale museum of queer history anywhere in the United States. There's one in Berlin that is a fairly modest-sized museum and archives, but there is nothing. And I think it's a no-brainer that it's time, so when you bring this to policymakers and funders, they understand that, they get that, and definitely the community understands that. And so the difficulty right now is making that a reality. And I'll tell you, Manny, the frustrating thing for me is, just before the shelter in place went into effect, we had just signed a letter of intent for a much larger museum space in the Castro, to lease this space and hopefully establish a long-term presence there. And we really had to kill it,
Oh no,
because
where was it?
that it's about 10,800 square feet, and it's up on, across the street from Pottery Barn. You know, on Market Street there's the Coldwell Banker building, which goes all the way through to 17th Street.
Oh,
Um,
so it would have been in the Coldwell Banker.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a big garage space in the back that we could have
Cool.
converted to that. You know, it's possible we could get back in there at some point, but you know, the public funding discussions that we were having with the city and the state just immediately evaporated. And then we don't want to launch a capital campaign right now. So at first I was like really disappointed around this. It's like, oh my God, you know, this, you know, all these years of work and study and justification honing our message is out the window. But since then, you know, we've really come to see it as a huge opportunity for us to really put together some a fantastic thing, which is part of the planning process for a brick and mortar museum, is really fleshing out what do the exhibits look like? You know, how
Yeah.
do we engage with audiences,
Yeah.
and how do we make it an educational component for young people, especially.
Well, that brings me to my next question, which is the justification for a physical place. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's non-rhetorically, but I
Yeah.
interviewed the CEO of the Aquarium of the Bay, George Jacob. We talked
Hmm.
about aquariums, zoos, and museums of the future and how they might adapt and why they might be useful. So tell me why you think it's important to have a physical place for people to go to understand gay or queer LGBT history. Why do you need a physical place?
Well, you know, I mean, I go. One of my favorite things to do when I go into the museum is to flip through the guest book, you know, and see what people write. And you know, you might get comments on a website too, or an exhibit that you have with a comment page, but the kind of impressions that people get just from walking through our small museum and getting kind of a chronology of the history is really amazing. And if I just stand there and I watch, you know, young tourists from around the world as they take in an exhibit where they see their story reflected in an exhibit that we have there, it's really pretty amazing. And it's almost invariable that when people stop in front of the Harvey Milk exhibit, and you know, this is next month would have been his 90th birthday. Um, you know, when they stop and they take in his story, they look at the suit that he was assassinated in.
Yeah.
And listen to his last will and testament, his recording, and just take that in. And it's always like, you know, there's, you know, people have emotional responses to that that
Totally.
they wouldn't necessarily get from looking at a photograph. Um,
Yeah.
so
And
it's tactile and it's emotional and it becomes spiritual and it's transformative for people. And so I think that it's sort of like saying, you know, is there a point to coming to San Francisco? You
right.
know,
Right.
um, and you know, part of coming to San Francisco is going to experience its history and the museums there, that really sort of encapsulate the rich queer history that we've had. And you know, we have a couple of big exhibits coming up around the 50th anniversary of Pride. Of course, last year was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, was very big in the media. Well, this year is the 50th anniversary of all the first Pride festivals that were held around the country. And so
Yeah.
we're doing a couple of really super exhibits. One was going to be in the basement of City Hall. And I was really excited about that because, you know, it's election year and a lot of people go there to vote and they'd be
Right.
seeing 100 different photographs. We're taking that online and hope to bring it to City Hall later. And then an exhibit about the first 10 years of Pride that was going to be at the museum, and we're taking that online as well. Um,
And you're
so
not
I
going
think
to you're not going to be able to bring to the museum eventually.
we hope so. We hope so. You know, at this point, you know, we just got to let the science inform us, our decisions around this, and what's going to be practical in terms of going into a space like that
Yeah.
in groups. You know, about 75% of the visitors to our museum come from outside the Bay Area.
Got it.
So there's the whole question of travel around that and whether it's
Yeah.
sufficient for us to even use it.
I remember going into your space for the first time and seeing the bullet hole in Harvey's jacket and how powerful that was for me as a new gay pilgrim to San Francisco. It actually felt almost like going to the grave itself. Another memory I wanted to bring to you and kind of add as a answer to my previous question was I was at the opening and I saw you there of the It was about the 90s, or leather culture in the 90s. It was about the 90s in San Francisco, right?
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. It
And
was nightlife in the 90s, I think.
nightlife in the
Yeah,
90s.
yeah.
And there was a whole section on Valencia Street, which is where my small business is, and the lesbian history of Valencia, which I didn't know about. And I think a lot of people don't know about. And it struck me, it was so amazing to read and learn about all of the queer female spaces that existed on Valencia for so long. And I have used that. I have used the knowledge that I gained at your exhibit in informing my audiences about where they are in our events, and also then being physically in that space and talking to my friends about it and seeing them and seeing Shannon and seeing Cleve and seeing Juanita and seeing all these people in the community. It created a jewel-like memory for me that could only happen in a physical space.
That's beautifully said. I've got to get you on our board or something. But and Manny, we're doing this series every Wednesday night, an online discussion called Fighting Back. And it's something actually we've been doing a few years. We started at the museum as in-person forums after the inauguration of Trump. And we just decided we wanted to bring intergenerational crowds together to talk about contemporary social issues in a historic context. And so right now we're doing a series that's specifically around looking at COVID through the lens of AIDS
Yeah.
and lessons that we can learn from that. And it's been really, really interesting. And this next, I think tomorrow night is on stigma, and the week after that is about sex. Yeah, because we got a lot of queer people sort of like trying to navigate,
Right.
if you're single or if you're in a relationship,
Yeah.
whatever kind of relationship it is,
Right.
and not just queer people, but in particular, I'm thinking about that. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we deal with this, and what lessons can we learn from AIDS? So anyway, you could probably be on any of the panels that we have. Would be very interesting to have you.
Thank you. I'd love to help. We have a couple minutes left of our conversation. And so I just want to say, if y'all have questions for Terry on this topic or on the topic of queer space, queer museums, the LGBT museum in San Francisco, plans for it, write your questions in now. I'm going to ask you about action because obviously, the history is so important in creating identity. But we are a community that is still fighting for equality, right? We're still, can be fired for our job in many states. There are a whole suite of trans issues of trans equality and trans rights that are not bestowed on trans people. And of course, I hope we don't forget the bloodiest year in history for trans people in this country, specifically trans women of color being murdered at such high numbers. And so I want to ask you what do you think the role of an LGBT history museum could be in actually taking action and fighting for equality, and how it could be used for the fight?
Yeah, some of that is like not necessarily a cause and effect kind of thing. When you go into a museum and you sort of learn, hopefully, a very specific kind of story, somebody's story. I was at the Museum of African American History and Culture in DC a couple of months ago, and I walked in and I saw the exhibit about Emmett Till, and there's the coffin that he was originally buried in, and people are just standing in line and filing past. And so when you think about young people in particular, but anybody really, I mean, I was really overwhelmed by that experience. And when you think about somebody coming through there and learning about lynching, the history of lynching in the United States, and
Yeah.
this kind of a grave and specific injustice that occurred and was not uncommon. Um, and what does that translate to? And then I walked out into the rest of the museum. There's people of all different races and cultures that are walking around the museum, and I sort of felt like um, I just felt like I was instantly sort of like more conscious of
Yeah.
my relationships with other people and how I might be seen, and so, it's those kinds of experiences that I think are really important. And I think we have to learn, with the AIDS epidemic. I was an AIDS activist, in San Francisco in the 80s and 90s. And, we had a lot of people that were in ACT UP that were part of other social justice movements, the peace movement, anti-war movement, of course, the women's rights movements and civil rights movements, who were the old guard in ACT UP, and they would sort of like tell us about nonviolent civil disobedience, and we would learn from that. And so, you know, things are different now. Organizing is different, but I think there's still a lot of lessons to be learned, from how we did things with the AIDS epidemic, how
Yeah,
we sort of affected change, especially when you look at COVID right now.
yeah,
Um, you know, yeah. So there's, you know, for example, I've been getting involved in looking at the homeless issue in San Francisco,
yeah.
and I have to, I've never really, I've always been concerned about the homeless in San Francisco, but what is it about now that has me so galvanized in terms of having passion around how the homeless are being basically left on the street, and vulnerable to this virus? And then it occurred to me, that during the AIDS epidemic, that there were stigmatized groups, um, people who were particularly impacted by HIV, gay people, IV drug users. And because of that, it was commonly understood, although people rarely stated it out loud, at least politicians wouldn't say, that they weren't putting money or efforts into fighting AIDS because of who it was affecting.
Right.
But it was commonly understood by gay people, and certainly we knew that that's what was going on here. And now, so when I see homeless people not being prioritized for housing, for safe housing, or services, in the face of this pandemic, that really triggers me. It makes me think. So learning about the history of it, and how injustice can affect a particular group, hopefully gives us some empathy for other groups as well. And certainly we experienced that with AIDS.
Awesome. Well, thank you for so much for all your advocacy, Terry. We appreciate it. Let's get to some of these questions. Susan asks, Terry, I have several like new condition Pete Buttigieg cutouts left from the primary campaign. I'd like to donate those to the museum. Would you like them? If so, how can I connect with you after COVID to get them to you?
Susan, I want one just for me, but yes, absolutely. We got to wait until the shelter in place is modified in some form, and then we're going to be able to start taking donations into the archives again. So definitely, yeah, let's hook up and make sure that happens.
Awesome. Okay, pause question. What's your favorite singular item from the archives?
Oh, well,
One
that's really
item.
tough.
Desert Island. You can only take one item from the archives with you. What is that item?
Okay, well, my mom is watching this, I think, so I got to be a little bit careful about what I say.
Ah, your mom doesn't know about you?
You don't know what I was going to say. Um, yeah, no, there's a few things. Okay, I'll just say it. It used to be my favorite thing. In an old Drummer magazine, there's this photograph that's in our archives, the Drummer magazine. We have a lot of periodicals. And it's a photograph of a dungeon in the South of Market neighborhood that had this like spice rack up on the wall. Um,
Spice, like cinnamon?
yeah, like cinnamon spice rack. And so anyway, and then we have this box in the archives that's full of spice bottles. It's not a spice rack. It's just a
Yeah,
box full of
yeah,
spice bottles,
yeah.
and it's got on each spice bottle there's a piece of masking tape, and it's got somebody's name written on it, like Joe, Fred, Alfie, whatever. And inside each bottle there's like a little wad of hair. And so clearly, so what happened was, so there was this dungeon master who just had this fetish, so everybody that he hooked up, we put him in his spice jars, and he just collected and put it up on the wall in the
Oh,
dungeon.
that's not where I thought this was gonna go. That is gross. Oh my
I know,
goodness.
sorry, but my real favorite thing, this is the G-rated one that I have. My other favorite thing is Well, I mean, we're
That's like, how old is that hair? Ugh.
let's not talk about it in any detail. It's going to gross you out, Dal. Okay.
Oh my goodness. I mean, own.
We're like a sexually diverse. I mean, we've got like an amazing collection of stuff.
No, it's not the taking of the hair. It's that the hair has been sitting in a. That's fine. I get it. I mean, it's not my
Okay.
fantasy, but like, it's just the hair's been sitting there for a while. You know what I mean? Like,
My other favorite thing is the dentist chair that Harvey Milk had in the back of his camera shop. And I don't know why he had a dentist chair. It was featured in Milk the movie, but
yeah.
yeah, I think he just sort of held court on it.
I wish I could have seen his camera shop. I really wish I could have seen what it looked like, because to me, I'm not ever going to compare what Manny's is to Harvey's camera shop, but it is an inspiration to me because he had a space that was a small business, but also had a very clear dual purpose as a political and a civic space. And so do I, right? I'm a gay Jewish small business owner with a small business that has multiple functions that is clearly political. And so I always wish I could have seen it because it's kind of the holy grail. All right, TJ Fisher. I love the GLBT History Museum. TJ, so do I. I also really enjoy the Queer California exhibit at the Oakland Museum, but that has concluded. What is your favorite permanent spot to explore queer history other than the museum?
Um, yeah, I mentioned the Schwulz Museum in Berlin, Germany, and I got to visit there this last summer. It was really kind of amazing, really, to see it, from the queer history from the German perspective, and sort of digging around in their archives as well. They have this huge basement full of stuff. So that's really amazing. Yeah, the Queer California exhibit at the Oakland Museum was really amazing. They used a lot of stuff from our archives, and it really kind of like demonstrated what we could do with a much larger space.
Right.
And the sad thing is that those kinds of exhibits that major museums do are temporary, and then they go away.
Yeah.
So it really sort of, for me, demonstrated what we could do.
Sylvia doesn't have a question, but just wants to say thanks for the important work that you do. So thank you, Sylvia, for that. I want to ask you about why do you think it's important for my generation, let's say, to study and learn and understand our queer history?
Gosh, that would be a question I would ask you. I'd be really interested in seeing what you had to say about that. But I think I've kind of like spoken about it a little bit. I think for me as a young gay person, coming out, and when I was coming out, I'm 60. I don't mind saying, when I was coming out, it was still illegal to be gay. I mean, people think about like gay marriage and gays in the military as being big advances, but just to be gay, period, have gay sex was illegal, and so um, so I think it's important for young people to sort of realize that they are a part of that legacy, that they're part of a heritage. It goes back really generations, and um, because I think I just think about the work that we do is really specifically intended for young audiences. The spice jars aside, the young audiences, I think for a young person to like understand, suicide is still a super big problem for young queer kids trying to come out as, or trans or as gay or whatever.
Right.
And alcoholism and drug abuse are still, depression are still big problems. And I think a big part of that is because they just don't have a sense of pride and belonging to a tribe,
Right.
and uh, so part of that is just knowing another person who is gay, who like appreciates you for who you are, and that's probably the most important thing. But another part is just to understand that you're part of a whole history,
Yeah.
and that people died so that you could have the freedoms that are available to you now, hopefully, And, as you said, we still have a lot of work to do. And so like learning about that path sort of helps us, inspires us to, keep up the fight,
Yeah.
and build coalitions with other people to make change for the better.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I guess my only, if you want, I can just say the top of mind for me is, uh, I think about it in similar reasons to why Jewish history is important as a minority religion. We're only on this earth for a very short period of time. If we're lucky, a little bit less than short, but short. And so, it is our responsibility to push the boulder a little bit for the next generation. That's the best we can do with the time we have. Hopefully we have a good run, we enjoy ourselves, we appreciate this earth, and we push the boulder just a little bit farther up the hill. And I think it helps that work to know who pushed it up to the level it was when we got here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your work that you do, Manny. I think it's really super important, and I think you are definitely acting in the spirit of Harvey Milk and having an impact on younger people. So it's very inspiring to me.
Well, there's no higher compliment than that. So I'm going to end this conversation on that and say thank you, Terry. Before everyone tunes out, there's 2 links in the chat box. One is a link to donate to the GLBT History Museum. Super important. You can also become a member of the museum. I am a member of the museum, I think. And if I'm not, I'm going to become one immediately after this call.
Oh, and I'll become a member of Manny's if you do.
Amazing. So I'll become a member of the museum. Terry will become a member of Manny's. We will support each other's small businesses. Also, for those of you who are not sponsors of Manny's, I know Susan is, you can go to joinit.org/o/Manny's. The link is in the chat box. You will get it in an email from me, but better yet, just click the link in the chat box, become a sponsor. It's $36 a month. Go to glbthistory.org/memberships. I'm going to go there right now, and I'm going to become a member of the GLBT Historical Society, or is it the Historical? Yes, the Historical Society, the Museum and Archives, and support my friend Terry in the work that he does. So thank you so much, Terry. Thank you so much to everyone that's tuned into this call, and have a great rest of your night, everyone.
Thank you, Manny.
Thank you, Terry. Good evening.